In Matthew chapter 21, verses 18 to 22, we see a story whereby Jesus goes to a tree and curses the fig tree because he doesn't find any fruit to eat. Why did Jesus curse the fig tree just like that? I mean, think about it. You know, we sometimes go to a tree expecting to find a fruit. If we don't find a fruit, it's not a big deal. It's not in the season. Maybe that tree just didn't bear the fruit that year. So we don't overreact like this to the extent of cursing the tree. Okay. We simply say, okay, there's no fruit. I'll come next time. Or maybe let me go to another tree. That's all of it. We don't become so disappointed to the extent of like beginning to speak to the tree, cursing it, to the extent like what Jesus did say, nobody will ever eat from this tree. Why did Jesus curse the fig tree? Remember, the Bible was not written to confuse us, but it was written to reveal truths, information. So principle number one, key number one to correct interpretation of biblical stories and passages is context. What is context? No story, no event in the Bible happens in isolation. It is always within a chain of events. So look at the context. Look at the enveloping verses, stories, circumstances. You will find the reason or the interpretation of that difficult passage. So why did Jesus curse the tree? Why did he curse the fig tree just like that? So the answer to that question is within the context of Matthew 21. If you go to verse number 1, verses 1 to 11, there is the triumphal entry. I thank God that just last Sunday, Christians across the world were celebrating Palm Sunday, the time when Jesus entered into Jerusalem in a triumphant way. So the cursing of the fig tree is connected to the triumph. It was one of the aftermaths of the triumphal entry. What happened? According to the prophecy of Zechariah chapter 9, verse number 9, there was a huge prophecy, a great news by prophet Zechariah. He said, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, O Jerusalem. Why? Because your king, your Messiah, comes to you riding on a donkey. Wasn't that great news to Israel, to Jerusalem? That the long-awaited Messiah is finally coming to you, Jerusalem. So rejoice greatly. Shout out aloud. So Jesus, in fulfillment of that prophecy, rides on a donkey, just as Zechariah prophesied. The disciples recognize him as the Messiah, as the king coming to Jerusalem. That's why they begin to sing, Hosanna, Hosanna, in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They spread their clothes all over there, and Jesus is walking on a carpet of clothes. Did that celebration escalate? By the time they came to Jerusalem, to the temple, nobody joined them. The religious system never joined them. Jerusalem did not welcome the king, her Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah. So in reaction to that, Jesus does a number of things. 4 or more than that. Number 1, Jesus goes to the temple and does and performs a messianic assignment. Because only the Messiah would claim ownership of the temple of God in Jerusalem. So he goes to the temple. What does he do? He drives out those people who were obsessed with making money at the expense of worshiping God and sanctifying the temple of God. So he drives them out. Now, what was the reaction of the people of Jerusalem, the people of Israel? They questioned him to say, who are you? By what authority are you doing this? Are you trying to portray yourself as the Messiah? Because you are not. So they rejected Jesus again. So number 1, Jesus cleanses the temple. But they still don't listen. Number 2, then Jesus, as he is returning to Jerusalem the following day, he goes to the tree, and when he doesn't find the fruit, he curses the tree just like that. Why did he curse the tree? It was not just the cursing of the tree. That tree, it was the symbol of Jerusalem, of Israel. So Jesus was proclaiming to say, because you have rejected God's grace, you have rejected God's plan, God's Messiah, there will be consequences. The judgment of God will come upon you. So Jesus cleanses the temple. Number 2, he curses the fig tree as a demonstration to say, warning to you. And if you study history, several decades later, Jerusalem was invaded by the Romans and the temple was destroyed. And no stone was found on top of another in fulfillment of the pronunciation or the pronouncement of God's judgment on Jerusalem for rejecting the Messiah, the legitimate Messiah. In addition to that, If you go to Luke chapter 19, verses 41 to 44, you see that Luke records the fact that Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. And Jesus began to weep. That's the third thing to say. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. How many times did I come to you and try to gather you like a chicken gathers, in the chicks? But you refused. The triumphal entry into Jerusalem was God's grace trying to gather Israel, to gather Jerusalem. But they rejected the grace of God. So Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. The fourth thing that Jesus does, he gives a number of parables. In fact, he gives 3 parables. Number 1, he gives the parable of the 2 sons. The first son was sent by the father to do the assignment. He said, I'm going to do that. But he didn't do the job. He disobeyed after saying, I'm going to do that. The second son refused at first, but later on changed the mind and said, I'm going to do that. And Jesus says, the religious people who were supposed to obey God, they said, yes, we'll do the assignment, but they rejected the Messiah. That was the first son. The second son, who at first rejected to do the assignment of the father, but later on changed the mind and did the work. And Jesus asked, between the 2 sons, who obeyed the father? The one who actually repented and did that one. And Jesus said, you will see prostitutes, criminals, and robbers coming into the kingdom of God ahead of you, the religious people. Why? Because they rejected the Messiah. The second parable, Jesus tells the parable of the wicked tenants. The landlord gives you to say, can you take care of my house until I come back? But when the landlord comes, you are the tenant, but you refuse to get out of the house. And you dare the owner, the landlord of the house. That's what the religious system in Israel did to the Messiah. That's why Jesus on Matthew 21, verses 33 to 41, Jesus gives the parable of the wicked tenants. He was trying to reprimand Jerusalem, Israel. And at the end of that parable, verses 42 to 46, Jesus tells them the parable of the rejected stone. To say, the stone which you rejected became the cornerstone. Anyone who falls on it will be crushed. And the stone will also crush on anybody. So Jesus gave all these as pronouncements. In the aftermath of that, Jesus entered Jerusalem, but they rejected him. They didn't welcome their king, their Messiah. That's why he cursed the tree, the fig tree, as a prophetic demonstration that the judgment of God will follow because you have rejected the Messiah.